Most of the laws are focused on protecting what we call personally identifiable information. Personally identifiable information means a lot, right? A lot of people just have the short form consideration of it's like, okay, I collect email address and that can immediately identify someone, or I have their first name and their last name, but the first name's not identifiable, but combined they are. And it's not just one data point, right? And so I think there's this lack of clarity, both in definition of law and just community definition on what is PI. And so founders, number one, need to understand that. Because if you have PI, it becomes immediately higher threat. If I could give like a one-line sentence to help all founders really consider how to be the safest, is if you don't have it, it doesn't cause problems. The easiest, most immediate implementable thing that founders can do is consider ways to mitigate risk through what is called data minimization. Only have what you need for as long as you need it for the purposes you need it for.
Hi, and welcome to Minimum Viable Podcast, where we go beyond the surface to explore the depths of product creation. Think of this as a masterclass in innovation, combining deep insights, perspectives, hands-on analysis, where we'll cover topics like the psychology of user behavior and the aesthetics of design and the timeless principles of storytelling. I'm your host, Elliot Popple, and the founder of General Collaboration. General Collaboration is a cross-app inbox for all of your comments from all of the tools that you use at work. So that way, you'll always be focused on what needs your attention most. Without further ado, let's dive into today's episode.
Hey, Joe, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. So I'm really excited to talk. You are the founder of not one, but two startups, DataGrade and Gateway Auto. And I'm excited to hear more about those. Especially, I've got a personal interest in DataGrade. From where I stand, DataGrade in particular just seems like the natural progression of what's clearly a really deep passion for data protection, for privacy. I know the bullet points. I know you walked away from Google when you couldn't tolerate what you were seeing there. I know about your book. I've read your book, Automating Humanity. I'll admit I have not watched the documentary. I don't know what that says about me, that I haven't watched The Social Dilemma, but I know that's critically acclaimed. I know you've advised U.S. attorney generals. Hell of a background. Super excited to talk and hear more about it. But like I said, I only know the bullet points. What is your backstory? How did you get to where you are now? Where did you start from? Yeah,
let me actually untangle the original running two startup thing for you real quick too, because you're the first to actually recognize that that's happening and bring it out. So to everybody listening, yes, I do straddle currently a couple companies, but my primary focus is DataGrade. That's my 90+% of my life right now. Gateway Auto is actually my family's business.
Oh, cool.
And that's a whole other story, but kind of bridges in with this whole thing, which is, 7 going on 8 years ago, I left the Valley. I was a consultant for Google. I spent my career across multiple roles. I was early in data science, and then I spent several years, about half a decade, coding. I realized I'm not smart enough to go and do the deepest ML and build the frameworks of code and all that. So at some point, the code I write is going to get written by code. And so I need to get into design and information architecture. Anyway, blended, built a really unique skill set and grew to the point where I was doing senior level consulting at Google. While I was there, I saw a bunch of abuse of data, and not necessarily malicious, right? This is a story you can read in my book. Anything that you've seen me talk about this, it's just that I was trained in academia how to do research for a couple years. I knew the ethics. I'd gone through an IRB. I understand those, and I knew that it wasn't applied in business, So not malicious, but just lack of awareness. And unfortunately, at the scale of Silicon Valley, it was creating gigantic butterfly effects that I thought was going to harm our democracies, our societies. So I left. I wrote a bunch of blogs about it originally and then turned it into a book because I just realized there's more to talk about than what I can put in one blog post. That book was written, as I guess you've seen, to be more of a coffee table book. It was because I'm from Nebraska, and I spent my whole life going back home and teaching at university as a guest lecturer and realizing, when I left the Valley and I flew home 6 hours, I went 15 years back in time. And it's not because people are dumb. It's because we have different types of knowledge, right? In the Valley, when we have a problem with our tire, we'll probably call AAA and get towed to the nearest tire shop, or get help some other way. In Nebraska, when they have problems with their tire, they fix it themselves. Inverse, when they have computer problems, they call pro, right? It's just different sets of knowledge. And I knew in order to really drive change, we had to educate the general public to go from blank to awareness and then literacy and then action. It's decades long's worth of work. Anyway, speed up a little bit. The book took me on a global speaking tour. I went on to, like you said, advise attorneys general on the antitrust cases. I've helped shape laws and global frameworks on privacy and data assets for the last 6 years. I was in Netflix The Social Dilemma, which is, to this day, the most watched technology documentary in the history of the world.
Wow.
We were, for the first month of it, the number one streaming film for over a month, right? Which is crazy. Netflix was like, most people can do it for a few days, maybe a week. We were number one across every developed nation in the world for a month straight. And that's continued you still see it listed high up in the rankings and suggested to a lot of people. It's taught in classrooms. It's going to be something that lives beyond me, I think, in terms of history, which is really, really cool. But to get there, this is to untangle the gateway thing. To get there, I left. I was doing consulting and getting paid for some speaking gigs and stuff. But I went to my family, because I was traveling so much. I said, hey, I don't really need to have a lease. I'm on the road 8 months out of the year. I'm just going to pack everything at your place and park it here while I travel and come home and, and at least have family time when I'm down. But what ended up happening was about a year in, my parents were like, hey, we didn't really want you to do our work when you were a kid, because I was just a wild, party kid when I was young. I was having fun, we all had fun. But then I got, I worked at Google and I had free time, and they're like, well, we could use your help now. And so what ended up happening is I went to them, I was like, hey, I don't have full time. I'm doing this book. I'm building a business around this stuff, but I'll help you hire somebody. And then that turned into, over time, actually, Joe needs to be more involved. And so in the middle of the pandemic, the business more or less collapsed. They do automotive mechanical service, collision repair, and car sales. And nobody's driving. There's no accidents. Nobody's driving. They don't really need to fix their cars, right? So it's like the business really plummeted, and it was lucky that I was home. I gutted the infrastructure of the company. That's the people, the operational docs, the legal structures, everything. Gutted it, flipped it upside down, redid their whole website presence, and within a few months became the most searched used car dealership in the state. We had national platforms calling us saying, how did you do this? And I was just shrugging my shoulders. But yeah, so I helped the company grow 4x over the last 5 years and increase profitability about 8x due to, installing everything I learned in the Valley, everything I know about data automations and really process automation stuff. So that's been a big deal. But that also helped me fund all of this. I drove my family's stability and have created and bootstrapped the large majority of my work. The first company I created while doing that was an organization called Pulse Policy. That was a policy generation tool. That was early days when the GDPR came out, and I thought everybody's going to need to update their policies. It's got to be in line with their operations. That's really difficult. If we can create a system that scans their environment, understands it, and then generates what at that time we were calling trust centers, but everyone was like shrugging it off, like nobody gives a crap about that, right? What ended up happening through that was I realized most companies don't care about being more transparent, and most consumers, even if you give them transparency, don't care that much about reading it any more than if it was just regular legal language. But what I saw from our customers was that everybody was looking at the insights we got to generate those reports and saying, how the hell did you do this? I didn't even know some of this stuff about myself. And so I did that for a few years, ended up having, between co-founder issues and just market fit stuff, didn't end up working out. We closed that. But I knew the insights from that was that what companies really need is an automated tool to understand themselves. And that's what DataGrade is. DataGrade is a tool that enables large-scale assessment of data privacy and AI risk. We go out and create, well, that's our tagline. We are the internet's report card, right? So you can come to us, and as we were speaking a little bit before this, we don't actually come at this now as we were. We don't come anymore at the frame of privacy or security or any specific vertical. We come at it from the perspective of data as an asset. And in doing that, all of those things are considered. So it flips the model upside down. And what we have created is a report and information risk intelligence platform that pros can use across those verticals and reduce their discovery work by anywhere from 40 to 70% at 30 to 50% the cost. So we found a really unique niche where it's not really touched, because a lot of the systems out there it's a blank template, it's a form, it's an answer this and then answer that. We're the enrichment that most pros are doing manually to go fill that stuff in. So it's been a really big value add to the professionals who are using our platform, and we're pretty stoked about where we're at. And I love the conversation we're going to have here today. I love privacy. I love talking about it. I love it more from the data as an asset conversation, but we can untangle that over this hour.
Awesome. I mean, that's a heck of a path, and that sounds like a heck of a startup that you're building right now. So I don't know if you knew this about me. While you were leaving your job at the one tech company that everybody loves to hate, that's about when I started at Facebook back in. You left Google in 2017. Is that right?
2017. Yep.
All right. So that's right around when I joined. So my story was my previous startup had failed. One of my investors had actually left his firm and joined Facebook full time. And he convinced me that, like, where else could I go and learn more about go-to-market? Where else could I learn more about how ads work, which was something that was important to me after that previous startup, then going to Facebook. I joined and was on this new team that was going to be working on some really interesting and, in retrospect, probably pretty scary uses of data. And my fourth week, Cambridge Analytica happened. We shut down that team immediately and didn't do anything with it. And I wound up getting reorged. I was the PM for dynamic ads, which you probably know informally as they're the ads that everyone thinks their phone is listening to them with.
Yeah. It's a good summary.
It's around that time, or called, like, I guess 2 years later, I wound up moving on from that team, stayed at Facebook and worked on some other things. But in my sort of decompression from that experience, that's when I read your book. The other book that I'd read then was Weapons of Math Destruction was around the same time. Yep. I'm sure that's come up for you as well. Yeah. So I'm excited I want to talk about data. I want to talk about privacy, personalization, and ethics, and your vantage point on all that and how that's shaping this startup today. Where I was thinking would be fun to start, your book was written so accessibly. Like you said, it's a coffee table book. Anybody can pick that up and read it. And there was this section of it around, like, what could the future be? But you wrote that years and years ago. I'd love to hear a refreshed 2024 version. Like, if you could wave a magic wand and set some sort of worldwide global rules for how anyone can collect and use data, what would you do today?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll do my best, because I think I had about 7 or 8 chapters on that. And for the people listening, I mean, I wrote chapters. I designed the whole book as I designed UX at the Valley, right? I think that's what my publisher was like, oh, why is this designed so differently? Books aren't written like this. And I was like, that's because no one has attention to read your books, man. So let me, someone who built the attention traps, build a book that actually can fit people's minds. And every chapter is very narrow. It's like 3 to 6 pages long. But it's pretty, like you said, it's accessible summaries of that. So if I went through and talked about that, I'll try to keep, like I said, in line with what I had written as best I can. But a few things. The spark at the beginning of it is really the antitrust conversation. And that conversation specifically in the book did go into the attorneys general when I was advising that case. I had what they felt at the time was the most cutting edge interpretation of antitrust law that they had ever heard. That's why they pulled me in. Because for those who don't know, antitrust law really comes down to a few frames. One, which is destruction of competition. Another, which is lack of access to resources or controlling access to resources. And a third, which is most important in current legal precedents historically, is, are they price gouging? Are they controlling and setting the prices? The reason why at the time the investigators were losing their minds on this, couldn't understand it, was that they could clearly see the destruction of competition. They started to wrap their heads around, okay, data is an asset, and they are gating that in several ways. But what they couldn't get was the price thing, because that's really where the law lays the hammer at past 1960s or 70s Chicago School of Economics mind and legal precedents. So I went to them and I said, hey, look, guys, you got to understand, data is now an asset. We don't operate, these companies don't operate in the fiscal economy like you guys are used to for the last however many years, decades. And so we have to think about this in the frame of the attention economy. And what that means is that today they don't take money from you as a dollar. They take money from you in the frame of attention. And when you pay more attention, like literally listen to the words, we pay attention. What happens is we click on things, we like, we share, we comment, we create data. Those are the assets that they then monetize, whether that's through better AI systems that service and create monopoly moats, whether that's selling to research organizations who want access to it, myriad other things, creating product spin-offs, and amplify. There's a bunch of ways they monetize it. So if we take that frame, attention, which then turns into data, which then turns into money, and you think about that in the way we consider law today, it actually operates a lot like a money laundering scheme. Right. And a lot of people, that's their initial reaction, is like almost kind of a nervous laugh. Like, really? Yeah, I guess so. Right. Because what it is attention's an illegitimate asset. It's not like gasoline where it's like, okay, I know this is $4 a gallon and it's $4 a gallon anywhere I go. Or a $20 bill. It's like, that's worth $20 in Delaware. It's worth $20 in Colorado. It doesn't matter. It's a $20 bill. If I go to Europe, there's an exchange rate, but it's still worth that $20 amount that's exchanged, right? We don't have that for attention, and probably we never will. In terms of data, though, data is an asset that currently is illegitimate, but I believe can be legitimized. Can have structured pricing, can have contextual risk and value applied to it. That's what we explore at DataGrade. That's what we see as our moonshot. The big, where we come is not compliance and privacy. We actually see ourselves sitting more as like Opus or Moody's or S&P, where we're evaluating risk on transaction levels. It's a different way of considering it. We're creating reports on that risk. Short to say, money then becomes it is a legitimate asset. So you have illegitimate asset, legitimate asset, and that transference is what a money laundering scheme is. That's really how they frame it. So I brought that to them and I said, hey, so let's consider that. That's one thing. The big problem here is that all these big companies that control this, they can manipulate the price, and that's what's really causing these problems is nobody knows what it is, and they can create the carrot, place it where they want, and get us all to move. Secondarily, let's say it is legitimized. I hope it is. I believe it will be. Then we have to consider the behavioral economics. And that's my core background, actually. I had a degree in psychology. I picked up coding because I was doing, like I said, academic research, and I didn't really like the theory of it. I did, but I hated being in a college basement all the time. I was like, I want to use this in the world. I want to apply it, right? I want to do applied sciences. And that's why I learned how to code, because at the time, it was 2007, 2008. I was like, there's an app for that. It was everywhere. I knew a little bit how to code, and I was like, if I can code these products, these softwares, I'm going to get a bunch of data, and I can do my own research, in a way that impacts the world. So that's why I got actually into coding. But yeah, so I said, I explained that, kind of framed them. I said, hey, look, so when we consider it that way, and you understand that attention is the currency, when they design addictions into their system, the intent of addiction is not actually to addict people. It's not to harm their mental state or cause what we now see as this mass brain drain. The intent of that addictive pattern is actually to get people to spend, listen to the word, spend more time on the platform, pay more attention. And in that sense, when they create addictions, they are actively and intentionally raising the attentional cost, aka they are price gouging in their own attention marketplace. And so that's my frame of data. If we want to start there, I think that's a good pivot point for this conversation. And in terms of privacy, I really consider data as an asset, and that's always been my frame. So that was one chapter. There's others I don't really want to tap into so much today, but in terms of like verification of an individual and all those, how do we create incentive structures differently in platforms? All that's in there. But then we skipped to another chapter, which was focused on taxation of that monetary digital asset system. That, in terms of what's happened today, I pushed on that for many years. A lot of people didn't understand. And then all of a sudden, I had a senator out of New York who said, hey, I think this is interesting. Let's explore it. I helped draft the first operationalized data tax bill, not just like, because there's taxes that have been drafted in Maryland, a couple others says we're going to tax advertising dollars from big platforms, which I just thought was like superficial, actually not what we need. I thought we need to actually understand and tax and incentivize the asset class itself. And so this is what I would call, like I said, an operationalized data asset taxation system. We drafted that more or less DOA because nobody understood it. And then a year and a half later, I got another call and they're like, hey, people are reading this and they're interested in coming back and talking about it. I showed up to a conversation. This was probably a year ago. They pulled me into this room to discuss it again and bring it to a larger audience. And kid you not, blew my mind too, but sitting next to me on my side of the argument across the table from lobbyists was Paul Romer, which if you haven't heard the name was the former chief economist of the World Bank. He was sitting next to me saying, yeah, we need a data tax. We got to figure this out. Like, it is the monetary asset of the future. We have to figure out how to do this. Otherwise, our societies are going to implode. We're going to have such a perverse incentive structure. So that's some advancements, I guess, on that front. It didn't end up passing still, but it's out there. And I now have other states reaching out. But what I'm interested in, like I said, is less of the compliance, because what I've learned over the last about 6 years of being involved in drafting laws and policies is that and I'm going to sound super American right here, so forgive me. I don't think the law is going to change it. I think that laws are good for creating guardrails, but we need businesses to change it. And that's, I think, the most American way of thinking about it. But that's what I'm doing. And we're creating reports to start to translate that into business value so that it's not a compliance cost in the eyes or ears of an executive. It actually becomes a value add to your business and to the greater economy over time.
So is that your magic wand? Sounds like it's this realization that like regulations aren't going to fix this. We need to incentivize the businesses. And that's now the approach that you're taking.
Yeah, and I should also frame, I don't think regulation's bad per se. I just don't think it's going to fix it because of my experiences in seeing how the system really works. Number one, we don't now or ever want a law that is ahead of the curve. That's, I think, almost impossible to begin with. But secondarily, we don't want laws that predict and prevent a future state. So laws shouldn't be leveraged that way. And that's why I say they should be guardrails. Secondarily, from being involved in the process, what I saw is that there's just a bunch of regulators who, to the detriment of their hardest trials into this, they just don't have the knowledge, right? They have a lot to regulate, right? They have a lot to consider. They have, agriculture, they have import export, they have so many different verticals to consider. Data, tech is now this new one that's exploded in this terrifying world. So they're all trying to react, but they don't fully know the story. And so they have to sit in these rooms and hear both sides and then interpret what they think is most reasonable based on their narrow, shallow understanding of what's really happening. And that's my other frame of like, I don't think it's going to work because if it does, if we get to a point where laws are like really, hoorah, good, I think it's going to take 10, 20 years minimum. And so I think something has to happen faster. And that's why I started to create systems. At least, like I said, in America, we do it through creating businesses. That's what I'm doing.
So thinking of how to best navigate this current reality that we live in, like for me as another founder or, thinking back to my past roles in product management, what are the things that I can be doing seems like it's this balance of like doing the right thing versus building the right things for users and the business. And how should someone wrestle with that?
Well, I'll start with the high definition of how we consider privacy, because I do think for this immediate question, everybody listening is probably going to say, hey, Joe, the asset theoretical stuff you're doing is great, but really I need to know how it impacts my business today. And where we are today is that it's tangible much more in the shape of a law. So that conversation today, when we look at this, if security is the separation of an asset from a threat, we consider privacy as the ability to maintain anonymity through control of identifiable assets. And assets can mean a lot. That can be my hair color. It could be my IP address. It could be, the places I bought things recently, my geolocation as I travel throughout the city. We label those both in terms of characteristic, which is like hair color, weight, IP address, individual single state identifiable point, versus narrative asset, which is I walk this way. My gait looks like this. I've gone from point A to B to C, and over time it tells the narrative and can identify me, right? So we consider it that way, and that's why like one thing founders should consider when they're doing this is most of the laws are focused on protecting what we call PI, personally identifiable information, right? And I talk to a lot of people who, craziest story. I'll just give it in a story form. I was in Colorado Springs talking to a guy. I forget the name of the company, but because it was laughable, I just couldn't even engage him. But what he had created was a system that you play. It's cameras on a TV in bars that create contextual ads based on who's in the bar. So
Holy
the
shit.
camera, yeah, the camera is looking at who's in the bar. It's looking at your skin color. It's looking at your body type, like male, female, trying to identify all these different things, and then displaying ads based on literally like who's in front of it, almost at the real time. And the guy, blue in the face, argued me that he has no PI. And he goes, because we blur people's faces. I was like, okay, sure, you're never going to get it. So here's my card, and if you need it, let me know someday. But the short of it is, personally identifiable information means a lot, right? A lot of people just have the short form consideration of it's like, okay, I collect email address and that can immediately identify someone, or I have their first name and their last name, but the first name's not identifiable, but combined they are, right? What needs to be explored and what we're defining is actually what is personally identifiable information. And it's not just one data point, right? Because maybe in isolation, the data point is not PI, but in combination with others, it is, right? And so you really have PI data sets as much or more than you have PI data points. And so I think there's this lack of clarity, both in definition of law and just community definition on what is PI. And so founders, number one, need to understand that. Because if you have PI, it becomes immediately higher threat. And then you're considering, of course, if you're looking at laws, you're considering, how many people are you servicing, because different laws have different thresholds. Some are 50,000 consumers, some are 10, some are 100,000. It varies like crazy. Some of it depends on your revenue thresholds. Are you making 25 mil a year? Is it 10? Again, it's just kind of arbitrary, and that's why we consider it from the data asset perspective. But the short of it, if I could give like a one-line sentence to help all founders really consider how to be the safest, is if you don't have it, it doesn't cause problems, right? We push the easiest, most immediate implementable thing that founders can do is consider ways to mitigate risk through what is called data minimization. Only have what you need for as long as you need it for the purposes you need it for. And there's this FOMO of like, well, I need to collect everything because I don't know how I'm going to be able to use it in the future. And I'm going to tell you that thinking's not totally wrong, right? You don't know how you could use it in the future. But if you're asking me for advice on how to lower your risk, the more you collect, the wider the breadth, the deeper the enrichment, the longer you hold it, the greater your risk is going to be. And so we preach, number one, just data minimization. Because if you don't have it, it can't be hacked. It can't be fined if it's regulated by law. It's just a benefit. And that's probably the first, the easiest way, I'd say. But a bunch of other ways too, if we wanted to get more technical, yeah.
So going back to that like hyper personalized spy cam at the bar example is just mind boggling. There are, thinking through the different lenses that I could look at that, there's so many ways that you could kind of slice and dice how wrong that is, or how interesting and exciting that is. Like on one hand, what a violation of privacy to go into a bar and be analyzed in these different ways and advertised to in these different ways. And on the other hand, like, okay, I can imagine a future where like, I don't know, I lived in San Francisco. This was probably close to 10 years ago. And there was some random app that like, based on based on geolocation, it knew what the ratio of men to women at different bars were. And if you inputted what attributes you were into and other people inputted their attributes, you knew like, oh, this bar's popping off and it has a bunch of girls that I'm going to be into. I should go check that out. And there's like this spectrum of, is that spooky? Is that interesting and neat? And then like, is it ethical? I get the data minimization, but on the other flip side, like if I don't, won't somebody else just do it and beat my ass? Like how do you grapple with that? Like, is there a way to have my cake and eat it too, or is data minimization really the true ideal play?
There's definitely ways to aggregate this and then get rid of it, right? There's plenty of identity solutions coming out that they confirm your identity and then they toss that information out the window as soon as possible, right? They put Booleans and say this is true or false. We found this or that. We confirm that it was true at this timestamp, right? There's plenty of ways to approach it. And yeah, in the United States, I mean, we're super under-regulated. That's part of our motto as the United States. We win through innovation. We don't win through regulation. Europe does it because they don't have as many companies that, they don't make money unless they tax us through regulation. That's my stance on it mostly. I think a lot of people would say that too. I'm involved in European groups. I love them, but even they'll tell you we're overregulated. Like we can't innovate. It's hard. And I've had also plenty of friends like France, Germany, et cetera. They tell me, they're like, hey, the United States is going through some really crazy stuff right now. But, and they're 20, 30 years older than me. And they're like, but you know what? In my lifetime, I've seen this happen before. And somehow at the 11th hour, the United States innovates and pulls themselves out of this. And that's it. We are the Wild West. So, part of it becomes an ethics dilemma. I don't really get into that, mostly because ethics is ephemeral. It's dependent on culture. It depends on time period, right? What was ethical yesterday may not be today, right? You have a whole bunch of wonky qualitative data points you have to consider that don't make good business cases, and in the United States really are going to, I think for our lifetime, just be mostly waved off as nice to haves if possible, but not necessary. So really, for me, it comes down to you as a founder have to look at yourself and you have to consider what you want to do. There is no such thing as bad or good inherently per se, right? Maybe it's something like killing people or something, like we can all agree to that. It gets down to that like morality level. But generally speaking, like the dating app or the whatever you call that app that you're talking about, I mean, it's not necessarily bad. It can be good. And even ads, right? This is the thing that a lot of people get lost on. And I try to direct the conversation otherwise because so many people frame privacy in the frame of ads, okay? Ads are not all bad. In fact, I talked to a lot of people over the course of the last, going on 8 years that they're like, I actually love ads. It reminds me to do this thing I would have forgot about. It's like I searched for that and I forgot where I found it. It just popped up in front of me. It's like my to-do list. And there's a lot of people who talk like that. For me, privacy is not about that. That's a minor fraction. It's just what the media can understand today. Privacy for me is much greater. It's about national security. It's about democracy. Right? It's the freedom to think at the end of the day. Right? If we have everything surveilled, there are and I forget the exact. I should have it, but I forget the exact law that's established. But it's the concept that if we are surveilled, we know. If we are surveilled and we know, we do change our behavior. There's plenty of research around that. And so what ends up happening is if it gets too widespread and too powerful, you will dampen democracy. You will prevent people from openly speaking about things that may be unfavorable or taboo, right? Even right now, and this may play off not so well to some people listening, but there's this dichotomy between, let's call it ABC or NBC and Fox News, right? Fox is bad, ABC is good. The fact of the matter is, in the United States, we always have and always will have this right to freedom of speech, as long as it's not harming people, it's not causing traumatic experiences or what have you. And there's also the idea, for example, asbestos. For the longest time, we were told is safe and clear. And then we found out 30 years later, it's actually killing people. But there were people since back then that were saying it's bad, here's why. If they didn't have the right to say that stuff, if we suppressed it, then we would maybe never have figured that out. Corporations would continue to use it and get away with it and be highly profitable because of those things, right? There's a lot of things we have to allow to be said, whether we like it or not. If it hurts your feelings, it can hurt your feelings. You can say that, you can recognize it, but you cannot punish that person for having these alternative thoughts. And democracy is a system where we're allowed to push these thoughts back and forth at each other and refine the truth that we all focus on and believe in and move forward as a country. And that's what we're really experiencing right now at large scale. But going back to privacy, where we are headed definitively is not just the, content moderation on, let's say, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, where it's like, okay, I'm going to suppress this post. We're actually getting into the surveillance of thought. If I, as a business, am able to see your entire browsing history, your search history on Google, all these kind of things, you may understand and feel that you are private, but actually you're being surveilled. Even your thoughts are. What you search. You might be looking up really embarrassing stuff that you don't want to talk to anybody else about. You might be thinking about really counter arguments that the government thinks is bad. But in the United States, we're supposed to be allowed to at least consider and think about those. Now, go back to that frame of if people know they're surveilled, they change. What happens if people realize they're being surveilled to the point where they stop looking these things up, right? Or they feel they're so paranoid they have to get into, a Tor browser, search this on the dark web, and then they're actually making themselves insecure in a lot of ways because they're opening themselves up to threats they didn't even know about because this is not attached to something that's traceable, right? There's a lot of problems that could come out of this. And so democracy is a big thing for me. Access to the data, for example, controls of it. It goes beyond just like, I had a kid. I was speaking at a high school in Boston, and this kid, similar, came from a big business family and was pro, no laws, all this stuff, and said, what's so wrong if someone knows my favorite chocolate flavor? And my answer was this: it's not necessarily wrong, right? But the problem is we don't know how it could become wrong. And if it does become wrong and it comes back on you, you would not enjoy that. An example, the Target dilemma that happened, I think it was like 2014, where they had sent an ad to a young woman and her dad found out about her being pregnant. I don't know if everybody knows what happened, but how Target did that was based on lotion scent. How would you ever assume that Target, knowing your lotion scent, would then come back to do something like that? But they recognized a pattern, which is that when women switch from scented to unscented lotion, highly correlated to they're pregnant. The scent makes them nauseous in the morning. They get sick. It's just like that. We don't really know. Then you have even more obvious stuff, which is like 23andMe for the longest time. Let's go see who my ancestors are. Let's go see what foods I can eat, all this kind of stuff. All of a sudden, my data's out. It's been breached recently. And now my genetic information's out, right? That's not just like lotion scent, which changes. That is what we classify as high-risk data, not just because it's regulated, but because it's immediately identifiable and it is permanent in perpetuity. You can't change it, right? So there's a whole bunch of different frames, and that's what our system does, is it frames what those risks are and how to consider it. That I've extracted above and beyond ethics that can be applied and framed in risk that considers governance and regulation, but is not just it's covered by law, so yes or no, right? Because that's how most people consider it today. It's like, let's make a control framework that says, here's the 8 laws that we think are the most stringent, and we're going to go by that. Well, there's I don't know how much everybody knows, but there's hundreds of laws nowadays in privacy, and AI is going to pop up and reflect the same. So at some point, you're going to have this giant matrix of 400 plus 200 privacy laws, 200 AI laws, and then you got a matrix of it, which is going to take that exponential. There's just no way to really adapt if you're building a global platform to try to get to every single jurisdiction. And that's why we flipped it upside down, as we're looking at the data asset and considering all those things from a different frame. But yeah, in terms of how do I apply it and how do I think about it ethically, I don't have a good answer because I don't really believe that the whole tech ethics movement that we had is going to sustain. And I don't think it's really a very good frame it's aspirationally good. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think it's a great way to run your business because your investors are not going to believe in it. It's hard to really quantify it and put it into business. And you don't. Here's the other thing for every founder listening: you want to be as good as you can, right? Everybody wants to, but you can't. If you really want to innovate, if you want this thing to do something in the world, you have to get it out there. You have to move to test it. What I say is, you're not a bad business if you make a mistake, right? I think that's what everybody looks at Facebook, Google. They're bad people. They're bad businesses. Well, I would agree at this point in history that there is some intent behind some of it, or malpractices at the very least. But if you asked me 6-7 years ago, my opinion would have been different. Because to me, bad is not that you harm. Because if you look at history of business, every large-scale business has created some problem at one point or another. It's how you respond that makes you good or bad. And in my belief, what we've seen in Silicon Valley is a pattern that has been empirically proven over time to be true, and the businesses have intentionally decided not to change. I think if you create a harm, you come out and recognize it, and then you create a roadmap and you actually change, the public's very forgiving. But that's what really needs to happen, and that's what I really advise to founders is, it's not about, what exactly happens per se. It's how you respond, and it's what systems you have in place to prevent it. And then once something does happen, how you reflect on it, how you document it, and how you pivot into something better.
So what I'm hearing is you're saying, if you want to build a successful startup, if you want to build a successful product, you are going to want to move fast. And in moving fast, you sometimes, to quote Facebook, are going to break things. There are these big tech companies that have broken things time and time again, and they don't correct their mistakes. And probably more importantly, it's those mistakes, when they become seen by society, are actually at odds with how those businesses make money. So they can't afford to correct those mistakes. Versus for our startups, it sounds like it's more about, if something bad happens, what are you going to do about it? And probably more importantly, taking a hard look at the mirror early and saying, how am I going to monetize this? Am I going to be putting people's data, people's privacy in jeopardy to make this into a business, or can this sustain itself in a way that I'm going to be able to go home and sleep at night? Is that?
Kind of. I think that has a really permanent mindset to it, which is I'm going to set this now, set it and forget it. The conversation I hope actually gets expressed here is that it's not a solid state. It's a dynamic thing, and you have to constantly be checking up on it. You have to have some kind of odometer to it. And that's what we hope DataGrade can be. It's more of an odometer to the system to tell you when you need to check in than it is a solid state. Hey, we did this, we're done. We checked the boxes, we're good. Because that's just not how it works. It's not how it'll ever work. And so, yeah, it's like I said, what do you have today? What have you put in place to prevent problems? And literally document it, right? That's what in data privacy, it's called a data protection assessment. It's not a document, or it's not documentation, like I said, that precludes you will constantly, in perpetuity, be good. It's a single state document that says this is what we're doing today and why and how we believe it will prevent. You got to revisit that in 6 months or in a year and say, okay, and especially at the startup level more often, okay, here's the things that have updated, and here's how we've changed, our business model or our internal governance practices, our people operations, to make sure, these other risks that we discovered along the way are now also mitigated. It's a constant back and forth like democracy. And so we really push that. Just don't ever look at it as a checkbox exercise. And that can be applied if you want to talk to it as ethics. I guess it can be applied that way. But really, that's just, generally speaking, that's privacy, that's security, that's all of it. It's constant monitoring and updating. And as you change, those things will change.
So speaking of checkbox exercise, I feel like the buzziest checkbox exercise in this space right now is SOC 2 compliance, or at least in the circles that I'm in. Seeing a lot of founders that have 2 employees, but they've spent $20,000 getting their SOC 2. They probably got SOC 2 type 1 and just wanted that flash in the pan single point in time. And it seems like this check the box exercise. Now, GC, we're going through and getting our SOC 2 type 2 right now. And part of it feels like it's the right thing to do. Part of it also feels like it's a marketing must at this point. If you're doing B2B, especially, people expect to see that, but it does feel a little check the box-ish. And having run a previous startup that was in the healthcare space and having to be HIPAA compliant. I was blown away when doing HIPAA compliance, realizing how much compliance was in the eyes of the beholder. And SOC 2 is like, write some rules, and if you follow those rules, you're good to go. But you're writing the rules. How do you feel about this new, seems like a craze that we're going through in maybe the past 2 years when it comes to SOC 2 specifically?
Yeah, so I'll just preface this with what I focus on is privacy. So it does require security to be private, but I'm not an expert on security. In regards to what you just mentioned, though, yeah, I think that's an inherent problem a startup is going to have. We went through as well. Do we invest in this right now or not? Because it is super expensive. And you're right. Like a lot of this stuff is documentation that has no actual connection to your day-to-day operations. And that's why privacy and compliance, I think, is often put on the back burner to so many organizations, because in order to have it work in pair with your actual operations, the agility of your startup, it would have to constantly be monitoring you, right? It's not really feasible. And that's why I think it gets passed off a lot. But also on the flip side, if you don't have this stuff, especially like in the space we're in, I don't know exactly what startup is you're building right now, but in our space, if you don't have the base compliance stuff, you don't even get in the conversation, right? If you're selling to compliance people and you're not compliant, they're like, a joke, right? And it's true though, even if you're not in compliance, if you're trying to sell to a larger org who has to be compliant, if you're trying to get acquired by one or partner with them in any way, they will have to be compliant. And that's what I've referred to as regulators said, hey, what you're creating is a big trickle down effect. And that's why it's actually beginning to stifle regulation. So, we're hoping that part of DataGrade can also inspire more affordable ways to go to market and understand your risks, rather than this comprehensive $60,000 or more compliance package. It takes 6 months, and then by the time you're done, it's out of date. So there's got to be better ways of doing it, and especially at the startup level, you got to have some of it. But yes, there's definitely a fine line to toe, and that's up to you and your board, really. I think how much is it preventing business opportunities? Really, I think the trigger point. Yeah, again, super American. How much is it preventing me from making money?
But that's like, at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do as startups. They're not non-for-profits, they're corporations, and they're corporations that are supposed to grow exceptionally fast, and that's the whole point. And it's tough.
Yeah,
it's
and that's also, that's why I said I kind of got out of the regulatory conversations as much, because what I found actually is that I never really understood law this way until I got involved in it, and I saw it at the highest levels of our nation. The reality is there are advocacy groups who go after it and do make change. I'd say it's few and far between, and more often laws, first of all, I think laws are created when an individual or a group of individuals become too callous to their moral obligations to society. When it's just like a general unwritten rule that society respects, and then you just break it because you see an opportunity to make money and it harms people time and time again, that's when we create laws, right? If Facebook, imagine if Facebook had just done all this like things we want for privacy before all the exposures, all the things that we know about Facebook now, we never would have looked at Facebook. They'd be huge. They would have nothing have gotten in the way of their gigantic trajectory and growth, right? But they did, and now we have laws that are impacting the entire world. Well, having seen how those are made, I actually realized a lot of the laws are also then shaped and validated by proof of concept and market. And that's part of why DataGrade is doing what we're doing, because I want to prove businesses can drive value from this. And I want to prove that it can be widely adopted. And then I can go back to those regulators and say, hey, we've created a framework that enables business to thrive, but still gets the protections you're looking for at an affordable rate. And this is more how you could shape the law, rather than this scope that you have today, which is more based on he said, she said conversations in a courtroom or in a back room of advocacy groups and lobbyists. So yeah, it's not easy, and there's no great answer as to should I get it or not. I'm not your lawyer either, right? So talk to your lawyer, talk to your board, talk to your investors, and make a decision that's best for your company at the time. But generally speaking, again, my frame is if it's preventing you from going bigger, it's worth the investment. Get over that hurdle. Go.
So it sounds like DataGrade is definitely worth looking into for any startup, for any product team that wants to build in this way. I'm interested to hear, maybe I imagine in all the work that led up to you coming up with the idea for DataGrade, is anybody doing this right already? Like DataGrade aside, were there companies that you met, founders that you came across who were like, you got it, this is the right way to do this. Can I productize this for the other 95% of businesses? Where'd that inspiration come from?
It came from really studying the laws over time. I actually, so as a designer, I made my way in because I was cross-functional, but also because I took a very engineering stance to design. I don't know how much you really looked into like atomic design patterns or engaged in that whole system. Like Brad Frost had created the atomic design system, which was an engineer's mind applied to design. So how to create all these elements, standardize it, templatize it, and scale it. And that led into what we call HIGs, Human Interface Guidelines. You know, Google had their material design, IBM had their own, you know, Apple had their own. I studied all those, and I started to get really meta-level concepts of why we design things and for different reasons. And then when the laws started to come out, I was like, wow, this is the ultimate HIG. Because if it's no longer compliant, if I design something that's not compliant, it doesn't matter what my design standards are internally. So I started to read the laws, and that's how I really got into it. And now today, I have a conversational level of knowledge that I can keep up with lawyers, even though I don't have a law degree. You know, I sit in those rooms and I can speak with them because I know enough to speak their language, but they don't know enough technically. That's what I found when I was actually exploring the antitrust stuff. I would go to technical people who would say, yes, this is correct in the way you understand how money's made and attention guard all, but then they'd say, but I don't know antitrust law, so you need to talk to a lawyer. I talk to a lawyer and they're like, yes, this is antitrust law and this is a good consideration, but I don't know how to apply it in tech. So I could bridge that, and that's why I sat in a lot of those rooms. But yeah, how did I get here at DataGrade? It was sitting in those rooms for more than half a decade, integrating knowledge from tech and governance and identifying the flaws in governance that were stifling innovation industry and saying, here's how I think it should happen. You know, one of our advisors, board members, and active chief research officer is a guy named Pete Herzog, who created the OSTEM. It's the largest, most cited open source security manual in the world. And he saw what we were doing, and he joined for the same reason. He goes, you know, I left my gig in security at about the same age you did. It was 27. And I saw an inherent flaw in just the way we were looking at it, which was that it was super brittle, right? You're looking at it, okay, I'm going to apply only the GDPR. I'm going to apply the CCPA. And then all of a sudden it blew up. Now there's 200, and I got to consider every niche jurisdiction. Boom, breaks the whole system. Or if one law, you know, you build a system that does apply to 200 laws. Now one law or 10 laws change, the whole system breaks technically, right? So he said, you know, I did it for security. We got it. Somebody's going to have to do this for privacy. And that's why we got in, is really trying to make something that's flexible over time. And it was the same kind of mind I took to my book, right? When I was writing that, I was thinking all the stuff I'm writing at that time, at least, was I was reading it and I was going, wow, this is going to be out of date in 6 months. This is going to be out of date in a year. Like, I had to really think hard about what could be applied that if someone picked this book up and read it in 5 or 10 or 20 years, it would still be true. It would still be valuable, right? Tech moves so fast. And that's where our framework comes to apply to risk. It's more flexible. As new laws get added, it will be included and understood in the risk, but it will not be brittle to where it is only to that one or a few. It's just a different way of thinking about it. So we'll see. We've had several pilots. Like I said, this was in stealth until just about February of this year. We've had a handful of pilots. Yeah, but it took a long time for us to really come to this circle around it, get a team behind it, get some funding. And like I said, we got early funding, but now we're raising pre-seed round and getting this moving. So yeah, we're definitely excited and open to speaking with others who want to get involved early and see how this works. Apply it to their business and think about it. But yeah, we'll see how it grows as well and how well the adoption goes. We're pretty stoked to get that feedback from people.
Well, Joe, this has been such a insightful conversation. You've given some phenomenal frameworks to take away, just some frames of thinking to take away. Where can people follow you to learn more? Obviously, they can check out your book. They can check out The Social Dilemma. Where can they learn more about you, about DataGrade? If they need a used car, where can they get Gateway Auto?
Yeah, Gateway Auto, 108th and L in Omaha, Nebraska.
That's awesome.
932-0500. No, but in terms of the tech side, so I mean, I don't have much of a social presence. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's the only platform I really engage on. I am even on LinkedIn and everywhere else. I'm at Real Joe T, so you can find me by my name or that handle. And then datagrade.com or our LinkedIn page, which is not super active, but datagrade.com. So, if anybody's interested, hit me up. Let's get on a phone call. Let's get on a video call and we'll talk about it. See how we can help.
Well, I definitely am. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. We'll talk again soon. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you for having me.